Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Inglis and Darley. My name's Brent O'Brien, and joining me, as per usual, is Tim Rowe. This week, King Kelly's resignation at Queensland Integrity Body reignites debate about the future of racing governance. Waterhouse and Bott kick Leilani Lodge. New economic reports reinforce racing's contribution to Victoria and Queensland. And Racing New South Wales regains control of Queanbeyan Racecourse's Crown Land, and while it presses ahead with a proposed Sleip app trial. In breeding and bloodstock, Australian buyers are grappling with the European market that's becoming increasingly difficult to penetrate. Competition heats up in the 2-year-old sales sector, and we examine the battle for international buyers in an increasingly global marketplace. In wagering, gambling reform returns to the spotlight at the ALPL National Conference. Tabcorp faces another significant regulatory sanction, and Hong Kong Cricket Club continues to provide a blueprint for global wagering growth. Tim, it's a fairly ambitious program I've unveiled today for us to talk through, but plenty to talk about. But one of the stories I sort of want to get to is actually a story from broke sort of late last week, I think last Friday last week, that King Kelly was stepping away as Deputy Commissioner of the Queensland Racing Integrity Commission. Now, on surface value, a Deputy Commissioner stepping away from that role might have been a relatively low profile story, but Kim Kelly's got quite a big profile within Australia. He's got a big profile within, obviously, Hong Kong and other places as well. Very well respected. And I think it's probably what he said on his way out that has caused a few question marks about what may be going on in Queensland at the moment.
Yeah, I guess you'd describe it as a parting shot. Actually, I probably should have used that in my opening par or something last week, Brent, but that was probably, that's what it was. And Kim, as he told me, he wants to take his grandkids to the races and things like that, so, and play bowls and whatever. So he has reached that stage in life, but he's also clearly upset with the direction that the integrity and Keurig is heading in Queensland with, the next lap and Tim Mander and the McGrath report, a review of how integrity will be governed, I guess, or managed within under racing Queensland and separately. And he just doesn't feel like that's the right way for the integrity of racing.
Yeah, it's one of those ones where there's probably there's different models you can operate within here, and the Queensland model and the Tasmanian model is to sort of bring the operational aspect of these integrity bodies within alongside the racing bodies. And I can understand why King Kelly may have concerns around, I guess, commercial interests and integrity interests operating side by side. And that integrity probably needs a little bit of a firewall around everything else around it, because racing is an industry which has had its fair share of scandals in time, and some of these has been caused by the fact that there's not been a great enough division between what goes on in the integrity landscape and what goes on, in a regulatory and also commercial landscape from that point of view. And I think in a situation where, like, I think what it does speak to is that there's some concerns about this, the outcome of the McGrath review, the next lap report, what that means as it's being rolled out. We've had Tim Mander, who's now back in charge, the Queensland Racing Minister. Matt McGrath's ongoing role as chairman of Racing Queensland. He was the guy that did the review and is now chairman of Racing Queensland. The ongoing uncertainty around who the CEO may be, the next permanent CEO. Lachlan Murray's been interim CEO now for nearly 18 months, Tim, and there's concerns about whether he'll stay in the role, what that may look like. A lot of questions about where all of that certainty sits. I think there's a bit of tension in Queensland at the moment, it's fair to say, and I think there's a little bit of sort of shaking our heads and wondering what's going on. The government have sort of put forward this $200 million fund, and there's questions about where that's being allotted. There's questions about whether some of the projects that are being funded, particularly in the regional areas, are best spent, building greyhound tracks and harness racing tracks out in places which probably aren't going to generate the best commercial returns. Alternatively, there's people in the country areas that feel like they're poorly served, and some of the people in the metro areas are getting far too well taken care of. So there's a lot of play here, and there's been a lot of sort of, I guess, rumblings of dissent in Queensland for some time now.
As we've spoken about a lot, it's a very difficult job, racing administration, and because it falls under government, there's a lot of things at play there for vote grabbing and looking after the MPs, looking after their own seats and different things like that. So it's a difficult job, and I think the next lap report talking to some industry people, stakeholders and participants, probably didn't outline what they thought it should have been or come up with, and that includes integrity. Kim Kelly did say his Keurig did liaise with the review and Matt McGrath, but they weren't consulted about this is the likely recommendation, which has been accepted by the government. They weren't told about that beforehand or had a chance to sort of lobby against it or anything like that. That's the way I interpreted what Kim told me last week.
Yeah, and I think in this integrity game, just taking it particularly on an integrity lens on this one, like I think experience is key. And there's very few people more experienced than Kim. His understanding of things. He's very good in terms of talking through the issues and understanding what the issues are. I think there's an aspect of integrity which is about, obviously doing your job, but there's also about explaining and showing people and giving people faith that the job has been done. Queensland had as it deals with the tri-code environment. It's had its share of scandals in recent times, as we know. Yeah, as all jurisdictions do, but it just feels like when you lose someone who's experienced him. I mean, I had 2 or 3 people call me that day, Tim, and say, "Oh, would he be open to a job elsewhere, do you think?" And, I was actually off that day. I had a rare day off, and you were following up the story, and it sounds like Kim sort of pretty much said, "Well, look, I'm kind of done with this. Like, I've done my job. I've done what I needed to do, and if people want to move in a different direction, that's me, but that's not my coping, and that's not what I want to deal with."
I think it's up for Tim, I guess, can go on the record of what his plans are. As he said, he wants to play bowls and take his grandkids to the races because, as he says, it is the greatest sport in the world. I know he did have previous offers to work in the States and things like that, but I think for family reasons went to Queensland. So I'm sure if he wanted to pursue, continue his career, he could. But again, people reach different stages of their lives or what their objectives, what they're after trying to achieve.
Moving on, Tim, to objectives that people want to achieve and being persistent in achieving that. 12 months ago, Adrian Bott and Gai Waterhouse were very keen to get a hold of Leilani Lodge, and they missed out in that situation with the ATC tender process with Kieran Maher getting it. Kieran Maher decided after 12 months it wasn't his best interest to stay there, and been announced today that Waterhouse Bott have now got Leilani Lodge. And look, I think it's an interesting change for the stable. I hope to be able to speak to Adrian in the next day or so to actually got a bit of a view about what this means for them, because it was interesting when I was looking through those stats the other day from my Run the Numbers article, Tim, where you look at the fact they've actually got a lot of horses. I think they've got the 5th most amount of horses registered to their name in the nation, Waterhouse Bott, but they had their lowest amount of starters in 5 years and their fewest winners since 2018-19 this season. So there actually has been a little bit of a season of, I guess, what do they call it, transition? I'm not too sure. But, in a season where, Chris Waller's empty scale up, Kieran Maher continues to build in New South Wales. We've seen Bjorn Baker's emergence, Annabelle and Rob Archibald, to that sort of stuff. That the Gai Waterhouse and Adrian Bott stable, which has been the most, with Gai's name and whatever else, been so prominent for a very long time in Australia, since Gai took over from Tommy Smith pretty much, we're talking, 35 years ago. It'd be interesting to see what happens now and whether this is sort of a bit of an inflection point to, A, their fortunes, but B, I guess, whether we see more of their runners. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think, and first of all, I think, it is Adrian Bott and Gai Waterhouse now, I think is probably the way to phrase it. Adrian's doing all the training, or Dew's doing the training, I think, and a very good trainer at that. The long-term model, predating Adrian, and, we've had Bruce Slade on, I think, has been on the podcast, and obviously does a lot of helps with the buying and things like that. They've got a model where it's 2 and 3-year-old focus, get them going early. They've got fillies funds where they, try and win black type, win the breeders' plates, and through to the slippers if they can, obviously fun. And that's their model. Where other trainers, well, we use Chris Waller. He's very good at training no matter what the horse, but he also focuses on the beyond their 2 and 3-year-old season, 4-year-olds right through to 6 and 7-year-old geldings that can win on a Saturday right through. Where at the moment it feels like Adrian's stable is, that's their model. They've got their owners that want to chase that glory, and that you are training for the owners what they're trying to achieve. And it'd be interesting haven't gone through their stable returns like you have, Brim, whether a lot of them are unraced or are named, rising 2-year-olds, because perhaps a lot of them will be at those first trials in September.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's no doubt they've moved towards a more, I guess, quality over quantity model over the last couple of years. And whether, like, stables have ups and downs, don't they, Tim? Sometimes they have like more horse in the stable, sometimes they have less. They have refresh points, all that type of stuff. Now, whether this gives them an opportunity, there's an aspect of this which will end up horses won't have to cross the road anymore, which is a significant thing for the ATC, and no doubt probably in terms of cost and insurance and all that type of stuff for the stable itself. So it will change things up. Michael Friedman's getting some extra boxes as well, which is significant. I think probably like, yeah, maybe he hasn't flown under the radar, but it feels like his growth in profile in Australian racing has sort of flown under the radar a little bit in the last few years, particularly since he sort of came back and worked with his brother and now obviously out on his own. He's making a massive impression. He's got big clients. He's got a lot of great support. And, yeah, he's really well set up for going forward, isn't he, Michael Friedman?
Yeah, we've spoken to him a little bit, and not often, but, great to speak to, but he's not a maybe I'm wrong, but he's, as you say, he's got some big clients, but he's not an out there big seller, look at me, come to me sort of thing. To me, my impression is his training do the talking, and why wouldn't you send him a horse? He does does a very good job. There's a lot of Sydney is a competitive space, and there's a lot of good trainers competing for the similar owners, same horses. A lot of them target the same style of horses at the sales. So that's why, I'm not saying anything that no one else knows, that, Sydney would be the most competitive jurisdiction, certainly in the country and, possibly around the world.
Yeah, and I think any way you can get an edge through extra numbers and all those sorts of things can only be a benefit to a trainer in terms of, building their success going forward. I'm just having a look now on those numbers of what Michael Friedman's numbers are at the moment in terms of horses. You go through, he's got 145. So it's a third of the size of the big stables, but still a significant enough stable in terms of those numbers. And he's had some great success, with Group 1 winners, slipper winners, all that sort of stuff over the last few years. Another story in the New South Wales landscape, Tim, just to mention, is Racing New South Wales regaining control of the Crown land occupied by Queen Bee and Racecourse. This is a story where Racing New South Wales became Crown land manager of 5 regional New South Wales racecourses in 2004, I believe, and then 2005 their leasehold or their Crown lease agreement around Queen Bean was suspended or revoked briefly while it was under review period. That 12-month review period is now over. It's come back under their control. Also on a race in New South Wales space, it turns out that Peter V'landys is leaving the building, albeit temporarily, doesn't stop the news coming out of Druitt Street and them being the centre of things. They're also pursuing a trial involving the Sleip platform, which is something we've spoken about a lot, which is this gate tracking analysis tool, Tim, which a story you've been following up, and it looks like at this stage they're going to trial it in a much sort of, I guess, lower profile, lower impact way than maybe would have been thought a couple of months back.
Yeah, they had meetings, Racing New South Wales and Dr. Carly Garling, the head veterinarian, sort of last month, sort of from May through to all they had sort of road shows right around the state. And there was a lot of pushback, I guess, and uncertainty, and they have agreed to delay, delay the mandate to make it mandatory. And now they said they'd have a trial, and now they've confirmed that via, Richard Callender, the New South Wales Trainers Association CEO, sent out an email to members this week confirming the trial, sort of stables right across the state, and give names, but they'll trial it. How long they trial it for, I'm not sure. I did speak to another trainer who went and sourced the technology himself to trial it out this week, and sort of trotted up 21 horses and thought, well, he's just trialing it. Seems quite useful. That's probably not the point. No one's disputing the technology of how that it can pick up possible potential issues. It's how that data or the information is interpreted, what that means longer term with Racing New South Wales vets. Is the horse allowed to race? Horses are often lame and it's just a management thing. It might be a stone bruise, or there could be things far more major that require veterinary inspection or surgery. It's the degrees of lameness as well, and managing that. Horses, racing, having very solid, consistent preps while they may have encountered an injury along the way, very minor injury, and it's just how that data is used, I guess, and the information. It's still unanswered question, certainly publicly anyway, and I guess hopefully the trial will uncover some of those potential issues before they become major issues for the training cohort.
Yeah, I think a few people put their hands up to sort of have a look at that and work out what that be. Well, hopefully they don't choose to employ it on racing journalists, Tim. Otherwise, me in particular, maybe your gate analysis might not be, it might not be working out the way we hope it will be. just on the other thing I want to touch on the racing space, Tim, with these reports that came out yesterday, Victoria and Queensland. Interesting, they released these in the same day. I would thought from a news perspective, maybe released them on separate days, but the same company released independent economic reports on the racing industry contribution, both Victoria and Queensland, exceeded over $8 billion across Australia's two largest racing states. Their size and scope reports, that's what they're called. They're prepared by a specialist consultancy, IER. They found the three codes of racing generated a value-added contribution of $5.5 billion to Victoria and $2.5 billion in Queensland. There's a whole bunch of data and information when I have a look through that. I think these reports are, look, it's part of this. I'm interested in your take on this one, Tim. I think part of them need to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt because they're trying obviously there to show that, politically show the industry are, but they do give us a really sense of, I guess, comparative strength of the industry from state to state and from year to year and where things sit. So they are valuable to a certain degree in giving us an assessment. What's your thoughts around that stuff?
Well, it was interesting yesterday. I did see some of the mainstream media for the Victorian release of their report with Tim Fitzsimmons, the trainer at Bendigo, with the Premier, Jacinta Allen. I'm not sure how popular a move that might be, appearing alongside the Victorian Premier at the moment. But still, I think, it might be a bit boring to the industry, these reports, but I think it's vital and really important that the industry continues to ram home economically how important the industry is right across the state and Australia for that matter. Basically to the MPs and the decision makers because it's very easy for someone to come in, a new MP that's might be naturally anti-gambling or just not interested in racing, anti-racing, and to point out the economic benefits, how many extra jobs there are. It's not just the jockeys or trainers or strappers, it's all the associated, I guess, jobs that it creates, or, the milliners and, with spring carnivals in Sydney and Melbourne and wherever the carnival, all that extra benefit that is, major, even our small towns. And, you're from Warrnambool, you wipe out Warrnambool or Wagga or whatever, significant economic benefit to holding those carnivals.
Yes, like a mill and a man, like a mill and that Tim, you're a man of many hats. Um, Interesting that you pull out that as the example, but I see your point around that stuff. I think you're right, and I think in Victoria it's kind of interesting because if the bookmakers are right, there'll be a change of government in November, which will be significant, and you'll have a new racing minister and a new bunch of people you have to convince what's going on. So it is an interesting one. I think I mentioned before that a couple of people said to me, if you get a new racing minister, it takes them 12 months to get him up to speed. I think there's a little bit of, go back to the Tim Mander stuff before, a little bit of relief that Tim Mander came back because at least you don't have to explain people what's going on, if they've already done the job before. So no, they are very useful. And when you present that data, it does give a sense of the importance of industry. I guess from our perspective, there's a little bit of, not cynicism, there's a little bit of like, you've got to, I guess you've got to be realistic about how where that data works and how that works out, and then, and it's in ways that you present, we present information and data on the straight like this, which tells us about the size and scope. We also present information around about, which we did yesterday, which got some interesting feedback around Roy Morgan's research into to gambling issues within society, which I think is something that racing has to deal with from day to day anyway, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. The following segment is brought to you by Darley. You only have to look at the names: Dubai Millennium, Dubawi, Too Darn Hot, Broadsiding, Night of Thunder, Ombudsman, and Gayaf. It's a line that keeps moving the breed forward. And now there's Observer, a Group 1 Australian Guinness winner and a Group 1 Victorian Derby winner, the next generation of the Dubawi dynasty, standing this season at Darley. 10 in breeding was a extensive racing section, so breeding's probably a little bit less prominent this time of year. Certainly bloodstock, interesting time of year. You had a good chat with Jamie Lovett the other day, Australia's Bloodstock's Jamie Lovett, one, successful, importer of international racehorses, star horses like Protectionist and Gold Trip, and these horses that have done great jobs, other great horses that they've had across the journey. Interesting that Jamie, look, having a lack of resources has never necessarily been Australian bloodstock's issue in the last few years, but trying to get a light on some of these international purchases for the big races, probably harder than it's been for some time.
Yeah, and it's all like talking to Jamie, even they did pay, I think it's widely known, sort of 4 million Aussie plus for Al Riffa last year to come out for the Melbourne Cup. And he's running well in Europe at the moment and likely to come back out for another tilt at the Cup this year. But it's still, what he says is just trying to get value for those well-credentialed horses that are Cups horses, Caulfield Cups, very difficult with the ammo racings, Wathman racing, probably buy horses that can't be bought. And then just the Middle Eastern markets really flourished over the last few years. We all know about Dubai, but Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and all these other smaller sort of UAE or, Middle Eastern nations that are trying to improve their racing industry and plucking out probably those middle tier horses that suited the Australian market. And Jamie just said there, well, as in his words, effectively that the same number of suitable horses are around, but there's competition's 3 and 4 times as much.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think there's a bit of like social media feedback saying, "Oh, we're just buying horses from overseas." Well, Australian bloodstock do buy in their yearling markets. They're always very active, and Jamie and Luke are often at those at the sales buying horses and breeding horses as well. They've bred some good horses over the years as well. So and they've supported stallion markets as well through I think like Pro Smash, and there was a couple of others as well, isn't there? Being Tim of
Probably want to mention him, but yeah,
yeah,
classic stuff.
yeah. Well, there's a few of those.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess you're backing your stallions in by putting them, putting them at start. But anyway, it's an issue. And it also comes to the context that last week there was there's the boy named Susie who was rumoured to come out to Australia, and deal was done and all this sort of stuff. And Will Bourne apparently had the ink on the page and didn't turn out in the end. And Donica O'Brien came out and said, no, there's no deal yet. It does show that it's probably hard to get those deals done where previously, the offer of that cash and what may happen. There's also, the whole thing around about on a more broader level about the challenges around the stands and the X-rays and all that type of stuff. There's a whole bunch of things around those international purchases of horses. It's made it harder. I feel, I don't know, Tim, do you feel like that market? I mean, 2 years ago, you and I are probably getting phone calls from the same people in the industry telling us that they were concerned about the amount of horses being bought from OS or coming to Australia. Do you think that's moderated significantly? It feels like it has, but I'm not too sure what the numbers are telling us.
Yeah. Well, on Australian bloodstock, they bought one horse this year from Joseph O'Brien called Perisher that very lightly raced, ran third at Royal Ascot. He'll come out probably for possibly the Caulfield Cup. But yeah, I think it has moderated, and we're in a capitalist society. You can't. There was that wanting to have import taxes and things like that, and having been in the UK last year, sort of after some of that publicity, it was quite interesting listening to some of the UK trainers that were not that happy about possible tariffs. And look, it goes both ways. I think just the market is cooled a little bit for the Australians in the appeal or the ability to find the right horses for the right money. So I think the Australian market just has to accept that importation from Europe is part of it, is part of the wider market.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that you're right about that, and I think the market takes care of itself, doesn't it, in that regard,
Yeah.
and how that works. Moving on now, Tim, to a story came out again last week. Magic Millions announced it will hold its horse and training sale the same week as England's Ready to Race sale. You've covered on this sort of fairly extensively over the last week or so, but it is an interesting move. It probably try to consolidate the buyers to all come down at one point rather than trying to get them to come down, a couple of weeks apart or even a month apart. Now they're going to make those trips down here, those buyers from Asia in particular, they're only doing it once. It makes it a little bit easier for them and might work out. But I guess the question has been on our lips for the last 3 years. How sustainable is to have 2 ready to race sales in Australia or 2 ready to run sales, breeze up sales in Australia, Tim?
Yeah, first of all, that obviously came out just as we were finishing up recording last week's episode. Look, there was, as I reported on the Straight, I think it was, well, not 2 years ago, probably 18, 19 months ago, that Magic Millions had gone to Inglis trying to let's come back together and run that one sale. Inglis has sort of got a run on the last few years with a bit of momentum, and last year's sales already had some good graduate success with Hard Kick for one, and certainly another horse, and Libertad's it's gone to Blue Gum Farm. He's a graduate of the ready to run race sale. So I think they're taking it and run. I'm not sure whether there's the appetite, certainly from Inglis, to combine this move from Magic Millions. I think it gives them a chance of getting those international buyers to come to their sale first. Where the previous week, it's an easy excuse for the buyer to say, no, you know what, I know you're paying for my flight or you're doing this or you're doing that, but I don't want to miss too long of track work and beat the races and all this sort of stuff. Now they've got that less of an excuse. They can fly down, then go to Sydney. I think it gives Magic Millions a chance to regain some ground. And speaking to Barry Bowditch earlier this week, after sort of a few days to let it settle, he's optimistic and says the quality of horses, he's quite happy with what they're likely to have in their catalogue. And that, again, that's important, especially for that Hong Kong market. It's all well and good, make it convenient, but you've got to have the right horses. And so if they've got enough of those, the buyers will come.
Just one without notice there, Tim. I was just thinking about this before. I know that last year when we spoke to Sebastian Hutch after the sale last year, after that 2-year-old sale last year, he was like, "Oh, there's ways we can mix these up." And one of the plans is sort of, maybe getting the horse to breeze up quite close to the sale and getting that sort of thing. Does that put a spanner in the works here for Inglis or not? Does that still enable that possibly to happen? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think that's enabled to happen, but it doesn't look like it's happening
Yeah.
this year. I still think there's, from what I'm told, and I haven't spoken to Tal directly, so apologies, Tal, that, he's going to support both sales as he always does. So, he's in Victoria. I think Inglis. So I think Seymour, he's the Magic Millions breeze up, Swangaratta's for Inglis, and then obviously Warwick Farm, I think, for New South Wales. And then there's Gold Coast ones as well, I believe, so for Magic Millions. So, and maybe Newcastle has been used in the past for Magic Millions for New South Wales. So at the moment, I think just that logistics makes it challenging. As Sebastian said, he'd prefer to have it, maybe the week before all the horses there, they all gallop at Warwick, breeze up at Warwick Farm, a bit like NZB, their breeze ups are the same week as the Magic Millions and English sales, believe it or not. They're all at Giraffe over 2 days, so you do get a reasonable guide, I guess, or makes it easier to compare.
Yeah, and I guess, it's true. Obviously, video and all that sort of stuff does make a difference. But we live in an industry where the ability to inspect a horse physically as it goes through its paces and how it recovers and all that sort of stuff will be key as well. So, and interesting to see how that develops. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Entries are now open for the 2026 Inglis Ready to Race sale, Australia's leading breeze up sale and the auction that produced group opening colts Tronbolt and Libertad this season. The sale continues to set the benchmark, recording a gross of more than $20 million in 2025 with an 81% clearance rate and a $100,000 median. Buyers from across Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong and beyond continue to target the sale for its proven results and outstanding graduates. The 2026 Ready to Race sale will be held at Riverside on October 15th. Entries closing on August 7th. Visit inglis.com.au for more information. Tim, in the wagering world this week, public policy and regulation continue to shape the industry's future. Gambling reform again it will emerge as an issue at the Labor Party's National Conference in Adelaide this week. What is interesting about this one, Tim, without getting too much into the details, people can have a look at the site around it, is that this concept of a national gambling regulator has been put sort of on the agenda as a possible discussion point. So we'll talk about that first, because I think that's an interesting one. It was a recommendation, I think it was recommendation 15 or 16. Oh, maybe even higher than that. I might have recommendation 3. Anyway, of the You Win Some, You Lose More report, where it's basically wanted to have a nationally consistent regulation framework, a complaints, and a national ombudsman all set up that actually to look into wagering and gambling. Now, there's a lot of positives to that. The negatives of that, obviously cost, extra burden on the industry, all those types of things and what that may look like. The racing industry has been broadly non-supportive of it because they believe that's too much regulation anyway. The wagering industry probably doesn't, that federal scrutiny makes it a little bit different. The other one, which has sort of been mentioned, it's probably less likely to sort of get up, but it will be part of the discussion and will be this possible discussion around ban around inducements. Now, inducement are things that we know as bonus bets and deposit matches and those types of things, which are common sort of engagement plays that, the big bookmakers make. Now, I think this one's an interesting one because I think that, while in theory, those who want, what they call harm reduction or whatever can see like there's value in this. We don't know what the knock-on effects are. Previously, the estimation could be about 20 to 30% of turnover. There's been estimations that it would be sort of, a significant kick in the guts for racing funding because a lot of money comes through bonus bets and things like that and how those things happen. I guess, Tim, your thoughts, the desirability of a change like that, I think I know your answer. And B, I guess, what do you think the likelihood might be?
I just can't see the state governments, and there is, there's 4, I think, state Labor governments at the moment. I just can't see them wanting to give up that control and tax revenue. Better's just moving to Tassie with a deal there that presumably pretty good for the government and regulation. Obviously, the NT Gambling Commission and whatever it's called now, wanting to give up that control and the revenue that it generates. I can't see that getting over the line, and it doesn't seem like a big one that the Albanese government would want to fight over with their, especially Labor Party colleagues, state colleagues on that. I think they'd maybe concede on that and agree on other things. That's just from perhaps a naive view, but that's the way I see it anyway.
Yeah, from an inducement point of view, and what are your thoughts around that? Bonus bets and those types of things have become such a part of the landscape, haven't they? And a really key part of, you know, I guess motivating punter behaviour. There probably are some question marks about how that's done and, what are aspects of that which are desirable, but they become such an important part, like I guess, you probably call them a sugar hit to the industry, but they're important, aren't they?
Yeah, again, yeah, it does drive a lot of turnover, and again, I think it comes down to how much pressure's on the government from within and how much they have to concede. With the Greens, obviously there's One Nation gaining traction and, so whether they, again, give ground on inducements, I could be wrong, but I don't think the government would potentially want to wind them back completely, but they might for political gain. That's, it just depends given the pressure they appear to be under at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the political aspect around gambling and I guess the view around gambling is probably laid bare in the Roy Morgan research report we published the details or covered yesterday. Yeah, the first thing about that report, which is interesting, it didn't really designate the difference between between wagering and other forms of gambling, which is, I think, an important distinction. And you and I probably both agree with that. You can't measure both the same. However, the one thing is about that needs to be done too. So we know, what aspects are being caused by gaming, pokies, all that type of stuff, and what aspects of harm, concerns in society, etc., are being driven by what's known as wagering, which is sports and betting, the sports and racing stuff that we talk about every day. So we can sit there and make assumptions about this, that, and the other thing, but I think that the national conversation needs to be had about those two things are separate, but we need to understand what's causing issues in both of them. I think where a national approach will help, Tim, if we have a national approach around research, understanding the contribution to industry, contribution to economies, but also, yeah, cost of the health system, cost of the financial system, all those other things to get a real guide about where that sits. I think that'd be clearer rather than sort of, you being driven by these sort of either state by state based or stakeholder by stakeholder based, reports and surveys, etc., which tend to sort of provide contrasting vision. So it'd be good to have a clear view about, I guess, net gain, and there will always be a net negative or a negative about gambling, right? So we have to accept that there will be an aspect of society which is harm, but is it significantly outweighed by the net gain, and get a view of that. I don't know if we have a clear view of that or not. Maybe I'm outmoded of that one, but that's an interesting one in itself. Tabcorp hit with a $2.7 million fine this week by ACMA about sort of its correspondence and whatever else. Like, compliance is a continued challenge for these big players, even though they've got strong compliance teams, trying to get all those things in place. There's a lot more scrutiny on these, and ACMA is only going to get stronger and stronger by the look of things in terms of its ability to enforce things. So we'll be getting more and more ACMA press releases as time goes on, Tim. And the other one I want to touch on in the wagering space, Tim, I thought was an interesting one, was Hong Kong announcing that its wagering turnover had gone up. Not surprising throughout that racing year, but racing turnover had gone up, and when you split out, obviously some of their racing growth has been driven by the co-mingling and the Whirlpool stuff and all that sort of stuff in recent years. But their domestic racing product actually went up slightly as well, which is positive for them, given, I guess, football's become quite dominant in Hong Kong in terms of a gambling product. It appears to me like there's a bit of breathing space here, and it also comes at a point where the Jockey Club has voluntarily sort of stopped its plans to progress with basketball betting at this stage, because there's a concern how that may affect racing and cannibalise betting and whatever else. So Hong Kong's a really interesting environment to monitor, isn't it? Just to sort of see how those things come out. And having spoken to a few people last week in the light of the national tote sort of discussion, it still remains the place where the big punters want to play on those racing jurisdictions.
Yeah, I can't add too much more, Bren, but I guess it comes up, probably the turnover figures there on local racing and Hong Kong Jockey Club racing just comes after, a little bit of an uptick from interest from owners, increased number of permit applications going into the ballot. The Hong Kong international sale was significantly up. So I guess just shows that the racing's with the local, I guess within Hong Kong is sort of still a major part of the region.
Looking for your next opportunity to racing, breeding, or wagering? Or searching for the right person to join your team? The Straight Jobs is the industry's dedicated careers platform, connecting employers with talented professionals right across the thoroughbred sector. For the latest opportunities and industry careers, go to jobs.thestraight.com.au. Off the back of that, Tim, just want to touch too on the members survey that we've sent out to our esteemed paid members. Thank you for your support. We sent out a final reminder yesterday. If you can get those in by Friday, that'd be awesome. We've had a lot of replies so far, and we're looking forward to going through those and servicing our members more going forward. If you want to become a paid member of the Straight, have a look on the site. Current cost, I think, is $19 a month or $199 a year, but drop us an email. So tell us you're a friend of Straight Talk. We might even find a discount for you. We'll see how we go with that. But Tim, anything else you want to touch on before going away? I know you're heading off this weekend for a bit of a jaunt into the tropics. Do you want to shed any light on that one?
Well, I'm up in Sydney at the moment, and
That's not the
planes have
tropics.
been flying over. You probably can't hear them. It's a bit like Barnaby's dog, but the planes have been flying over during the recording of this podcast, which has made it a little bit more difficult, but I held my nerve there. Yes, I am going up to Malaysia for the Selangor Mile on Sunday, heading up there tomorrow. As you know, it's probably a sort of follow that region quite closely, perhaps against my better judgment, but there's a lot of good people up there. It's a million ringgit race. The majority of the field is Australasian bred, either bought at 2-year-old sales or online, particularly English, digital, of course. So, yeah, a really interesting open betting race too. I'd say Duma will be sort of in the market, which is a 2-to-1 hot 4-year-old who was sold through sort of the NZB 2-year-old sale a couple of years ago for Frank Maynard, an expat Aussie training over there.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you doing the hard yards, Tim. Go. It's difficult for you to have to travel to such warmer climes because Selangor seems a lot more appealing than Wagga and certainly Hobart at this time of year. So enjoy your time up there. We'll catch up with you all next week. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our brilliant sponsors at Darley and Inglis. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast where you're listening. If you have a feedback on a topic you'd like us to discuss, send us an email, brent@thestraight.com.au. There you go. I gave him my direct email now. I'm just going straight to me. Don't go to editor at the Straight. Go to brent@thestraight.com.au or tim@thestraight.com.au if you wish. Or if you want travel tips around Kuala Lumpur, maybe Tim could help you out with that as well. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you again next week.